Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name is Alex, as always, here with Brett Kollmann, Chargers content creator, Bootleg Football, all of the stuff following the draft. We were just talking about how we both did 7-hour live streams last week. That took a lot out of us on day 3 when the picks are rolling in and you kind of don't know who the players are. But he's here to talk about what the Chargers did in the draft. So, Brett, how are you doing?
I'm great. And, being a SoCal native, I'm excited to see these guys at training camp in a few months. Probably one of the more talented Chargers draft classes I can remember in a while.
So let's start with the first round pick. What were your thoughts going into the evening about what the Chargers were going to do, and how did you feel coming out of it?
Going into the evening, I kind of felt like it was either going to be pass rusher or guard, like just based on what we know about the velocity of this team. It just felt like they were going to go trenches. And, I thought like there was an outside shot at receiver, but this feels like a front office that likes getting receiver on day 2, which ended up happening. I never thought they'd do running back early on, and I would have loved, if somebody had fallen, if they went running back, because I wasn't super keen on the Najee signing, compared to where else they could have spent that money. But I didn't really think that Omarion was going to be there. And so to see him there at 22, I was like, there's literally no way they can take anybody else. And luckily they took him.
Yeah, it was weird. I think going into the evening, my expectation was DT, and the board just played out in a way where Kenneth Grant goes at 13, and it's like, okay, all right, like this is going to go very fast. Then Walter Nolan, and then right before they pick Derek Harmon. A little interesting because I don't know if you caught the day 2 Chargers post-draft press conference, but in talking about Jamari Caldwell, Joe Hortiz said that he went to Oregon twice, like to watch games in person. And then Harbaugh was also raving about Derek Harmon quite a bit before then saying I shouldn't talk about players on other teams. So
I feel like he was going to be the guy if he was there, but
yeah. And there was all that talk about obviously Shadur and how that's played out during the week. And I do feel like he kind of would have been the guy. Then you also get into the Florio stuff and stuff that's been reported about the Eagles' possible trade back since. What do you make value-wise of going with Omarion there versus the possibility of the Chargers potentially trading back at that spot that's been discussed?
I think if they traded back, they realized that they probably would not get a player as good as Hampton, for one.
Right.
But also, do we know what the offer was that was on the table?
I don't think
it's possible the
think,
Eagles didn't give him a good offer,
Yeah, I don't think the terms that like picks wise have been discussed, but I mean, based on history, I would guess it was something like a first plus a third/fourth. That's kind of, it doesn't feel like it was a ton to go up there if like other teams weren't trying to trade up to the degree that it seems like the Eagles were. But then it's weird because you look at obviously what the Falcons did to be able to trade up, the Giants somewhere in the middle of that. So I'm curious what the offer would have been, but obviously sticking there and taking Omarion when it sounded like maybe the deal would go through, it seems like they were also confident that he was not going to be there at 32 if you did make that trade down.
I really don't think he would have been, to be honest. And, he was one of maybe the last, like, arguably blue chip kind of guy. And maybe not everybody would see him as a blue chipper, but keep in mind on my grading scale, at Ashton Genty in the 81 and Hampton is an 80. So he was like right there for me. And, to have a top 12-ish player in the class be there at 22, you're already playing with fire at that point. So I think it was just take the good player and thank your lucky stars that he was there. He's going to be the engine of the offense. He's going to be, probably the most talented Chargers back since LaDainian. And I think he's the kind of back that doesn't really fall into your lap that often. So you might as well make use of it.
Yeah, and I think you look at what they did last year with obviously Dobbins was in the fold, and then they had kind of a bunch of pieces while they were kind of maneuvering their cap situation. You bring in Gus, you bring in Kamani, um, and tried to kind of like make that work. JK obviously pretty good last year by all the indicators, but when JK didn't play, right, they down from 15th in rush EPA to the 4 games he missed, they were 30th. And I think that like kind of shows you from obviously dependability standpoint and the ability to be there, but also when you have, even a level past JK of like a true difference maker in the run game, like Omarion, to then pair him with Najee, who is that model of consistency. He's going to give you the 3 yards you need when you need the 2, right, to pick up the first down. He's going to grind out those yards. I think it made a lot of sense why they went the way they did. And I'm juiced about Omarion too. I mean, one of the better prospects in this draft. I didn't quite have him in the Genty tier, but there's not many people in this class that I think have that combination of the size, speed, his power, and perfect fit for Greg Roman power run game. Everything that they want to do. So I think you can talk about certainly the value of running back in the first round, and there's always those conversations. But to me, I think Omarion and Genty as well fall into a category of running back that I'm not thinking as much about, the value compared to some of the other first round running backs that have come out. I do think they are in that Bijan, Saquon, Zeke tier where, if that level of player kind of falls to you, you certainly think about it.
Also, you're going to get him for at least the next 5 years of
Right.
control. So I don't know where the 22nd pick as far as like contract slotting is for like highest paid running back. But, if we think he's a top 10 running back and he's getting paid outside the top 10 among running backs right now, which I'm sure he probably would be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just now, let alone 2 to 3 to 4 years from now before, let's just say, he earns an extension and that kicks in. Like he, relative to where the market at the top of the position is, I still think he's going to be a value. So people say, don't take running backs in the first round, and it's like, well, it's don't take most running backs in the
Yeah.
first round. Like you take the special ones in the first round, and then the real question is, and it's largely based on health and where the rest of your roster is. The real question is like, whether you pay them the second time around, which sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It really kind of depends on who it is, right? Like Derrick Henry worked out for the Titans, worked out for the Ravens. Zeke, not so much because injuries started to mount up. So everything is on a case by case basis. But I think the people say who say don't take a running back in the first round, and it's like, well, what about all the really, really, really good running backs that have defined their offenses over the years that were taken in the first round, right? So I don't know. I think people see like Alfred Morris pop off for 1,500 yards and assume every team can do that. It's like, not really. No, that's not as common as you think.
Right. And I also think it's about the difference if you do wait on running back, because I think we saw some teams in this draft who like maybe wanted to take a running back a little bit earlier, but then that value was never there kind of in the rounds, and they kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And, if the Chargers had gotten back to 55, right, like you don't want to overdraft certainly a running back or as in terms of like BPA on your board and like then feel like you have to take a running back when, you kind of don't want to, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like that was also you take Hampton and then you can focus on attacking a lot of weapons, which they did, and then going to attack the defense. Let's get into some of their other picks now. They obviously go with Trey Harris, then they go with Jamari Caldwell, Kyle Kennard, round 4. And then they go with Keandre Lambert-Smith, Aronde Gadsden. What did you kind of make of what that group of rounds said about their identity and their intent in this draft?
I think, if you're looking at what they did last year and then this year, it felt like they ate their vegetables last year and they got to eat dessert this year, right? So you took your franchise running back, you took a really explosive, dynamic outside receiver in Trey Harris. You took another outside receiver in Keandre Lambert-Smith so that you're never bare at that position again, because at the end of last year, the entire passing game was funneled through Ladd McConkey, and they didn't have anybody else. So, you get receiver help. Obviously, they brought back Mike, and we'll see how many games he ends up actually playing.
Right.
You have the run game that should be, the pace car for your offense anyway. And then, the Oronde Gadsden selection, captain choice route. I like him a lot as like you can call him a TE2, you can call him a big slot, you can call him an H-back. Like, he's going to be the guy that, like, on 3rd and 5 is going to get you 6 yards over and over and over again, because that's what he was really good at Syracuse. And, he's athletic enough that if you want to take shots to him down the seam, you can do that as well. Almost kind of like how Roman used Isaiah Likely, I would say, that kind of mold. I don't expect a whole lot from him as a blocker. I think he'll try. I just don't think he's very good at it right now. Not an effort thing, more of a lack of technique thing. And so, again, I look at all these picks, and it's just weapon, 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 weapon. And it feels like last year they just ran out of guys, and they want to make sure that never happens again, while also, throwing in some picks to the defensive side to make sure that side of the ball is not completely empty. Like they really needed a nose because of what happened in free agency. And so they're like, all right, there's a few nose tackles we like. Late day 2, early day 3, bring in Jamari. He's a boulder that you just put in the middle of your defensive line, and they needed that role filled again. The Kennard pick, I'll be honest, I wasn't super jazzed about that one. I felt it was kind of early for him, but at the same time, there was a lot of edges going off the board, and I think they were like, we gotta catch this train at the last station before it leaves. So, like, I get it. It was just a little bit early for me. But overall, it really felt like they were trying to get enough weapons so that Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey didn't have to do everything by themselves. And that is huge for this year.
Yeah, I think it's huge for this year too, and obviously sends the message that you're trying to develop this offense in a way where you can get a little bit more vertical, where it just felt like, if, like you said, if they didn't get that big play to Ladd McConkey last year and you didn't have multiple guys who could give you that big play, they just got so far, behind the sticks each time. And then in Houston, where in addition to that, your offensive line and your run game doesn't hold up, then the game just very quickly gets away from you, regardless of what Ladd's doing. And so I think it was super necessary to address that. You mentioned Arande. I was a little crazy with him this draft. I had him at TE6, and I know that's a little bit. It's a little rich for people, but I did think that he was kind of like, a little bit like poor man's Mason Taylor this draft with like some of what he could do. I don't think he was quite.
No, I see it, but that's also because I was lower on Mason Taylor than a lot of people to begin with.
Yeah.
So I feel, if we're talking about like the gap between them wasn't that crazy, like I could get behind that.
Yeah, and just the way that his catch radius too, when he would just have a corner or a safety or a linebacker just draped all over him on the sideline, and it just felt like it didn't matter. I think having that kind of safety valve for Justin Herbert, you can give him the choice route. I'm sure Greg Roman is already thinking about seam balls that you can give him and things of that nature. But I think he's going to make offense a lot easier. And their philosophy at tight end, especially after that Houston game where you just get some surefire, sure-handed pass catchers, right? Tyler Conklin never drops the ball. Gadsden, another 3.9% drop rate guy. And I think having Will Dissly now be able to kind of play that more prototypical blocking tight end too, while also getting involved in a screen now or there, but you're not making him overly responsible for the offensive load. And so I think that was a home run pick for me, just based on how much I like Gadsden. I get the Kyle Kennard pick. I mean, I think you needed to get more at edge there, especially, they like running their little, as I think one of the hosts of Chargers Weekly said, their NASCAR packages, right, a little bit, where I think Kyle Kennard can flash certainly the pass rush value there, even though obviously as a complete edge right now as a run defender, I don't think he's quite all the way there yet. The one that kind of got me on day 3 was the Keandre Lambert-Smith one, and I know you're big on him.
I do
But
love him.
that felt like not really an indictment on him, but it felt like that was one of the last spots in the draft where they maybe, not that you're going to get an offensive lineman that is going to be able to play day 1 for certain, but then when you go Branson Taylor 6th round, that is also kind of like, all right, this is we're going to push to the future as like kind of a deep project here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they've done enough this offseason to then like double, triple down on like the receiver, especially including Gadsden. But I get why they got Lambert-Smith in this draft. As far as his personal profile, he offers something different than Ladd. He offers something different than obviously Mike and Trey Harris with what he can do, taking defenses over the top. But I did feel like that to me should have maybe been a guard or center spot, but I get why they didn't. I'm just a little bit concerned now when you have Becton, the injury history he
I was gonna
has.
say they're thin,
Yeah,
right? Like
they
that's what you
yeah,
worry about
that does
is
feel like the issue there, just because you do have Trey Pipkins who can play some decent snaps, right? Tackle, swing tackle, guard, but that feels like and you have like a Bozeman, Zion, Andre James competition going on now for maybe 2 of those spots, in addition to potentially signing a guy. So that feels like the thing that's like the biggest priority of the offseason was weapons and that. But now that you've solved the weapons, it's like you didn't completely solve that in the draft, which maybe you can't solve everything in one draft for sure. But that was kind of the pick that maybe stuck out to me. I don't know.
To me, the fact that they didn't go interior offensive line early, that means they still believe in Zion. They still believe in Bozeman. Obviously they brought in Mekhi for a reason, to give them like some sense of stability, but Mekhi's injury history is the injury history. So like how long is it going to be stable, right? But that to me signaled that they still like Zion as a player, and obviously they believe in Bozeman. And Andre James, I didn't get the sense they brought him there to compete for a starting role. I think they brought him there to just be a backup. I hope he's not a starter, I'll tell you that much. I watched that Raiders run game last year. It wasn't great. But I just think they believe in what they have, and whether they're right or wrong, I have no idea. Again, I would have taken guard earlier, but they had conviction about we need weapons, which I'll tell you what, over the course of like Greg Roman's history, very rarely have we ever seen him like actively go out and get a bunch of weapons. So like I kind of like that growth from him as well. But yeah, it's just different approaches, different philosophies, and we'll see who's right and who's wrong. Like I hope everybody stays healthy. I hope they play better than they did last year. Because like on paper, I could see this being a really good offensive line, but it as usual, they're one injury away from disaster, and we just kind of have to cross our fingers.
Right. And, I do think it gave me, like you said, they are more convinced that if Zion tries out at center, that he's going to be good at it, which I think will be an interesting wrinkle to the offseason. If you do have a really good center in Zion Johnson, then you have a good right guard in Mekhi Becton, obviously. Then you sort of only have one spot to solve, theoretically, between Andre James or Bradley Bozeman maybe playing that left guard spot. But it just feels like a lot of ifs, right?
Yeah,
Where we don't quite know. So not to harp too much on that. Tell me why, for I guess for people who don't know or haven't watched as much Keandre Lambert-Smith, why you're so high on him.
ball skills. Like he makes some really, really crazy catches. He makes his quarterback right. Now he won't have to do that a whole lot with Justin Herbert, who's very accurate, but Justin can trust him to bring the ball in deep down the field and contort his body in all sorts of crazy pretzel-like ways to make him right and to pay off that faith. And I think he's going to fill a very similar role to like Guyton, a few years back.
Right.
But I think he's got better hands. And, again, that was an element that I think was missing from this team because, Mike is an outside receiver, but he's more a post you up, make crazy catches on the sidelines kind of guy, but not necessarily like a really take the top off kind of guy. Like you're not really putting a safety dedicated over the top of Mike because
Right.
it's just going to be a jump ball anyway. Whereas Keandre Lambert Smith, like you are genuinely worried if the corner that you have out there can run fast enough to keep up one on one because he is really, really gifted as far as vertical speed goes. And then, you combine that with Ladd, who can kind of play a little bit everywhere, but obviously they see him as like primarily going to be in the slot. And then Trey Harris, who, it's kind of odd to say this, but he is a mix of every other Chargers receiver in little different ways, right? Like I
Yeah.
think he's got the yak ability of Ladd. I think he's got some of the ball winning ability of Mike. I think he's underrated as far as like vertical speed goes. He's got that a little bit from, and so he's almost like 80% of each individual Chargers receiver all mashed into one. So he's his own guy, but he is like the true generalist here, which is an advantage in itself because if you have a particular matchup that you really want to exploit in any given week with Keandre or Ladd or Mike, you can put Trey Harris at any other spot and he'll be okay. And so that general skill set is useful for helping the more specialized guys take advantage of whatever matchup they want to exploit.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And now that they all, like you said, with Trey Harris having kind of everyone's skill set, and then you have sort of these more diverse skill sets with Ladd as well as Keandre, I think there is more of a through line to their offense that you can see as far as what they're trying to construct versus last year. It's like, all right, DJ Chark and Quentin Johnston, go beat Derek Stingley. Go
It's
go
more
out
like
there.
throw it to Quentin, he'll
Yeah.
drop it. Try it again to reinstill confidence. He'll drop it again. All right, it's 3rd and 12. Ladd, what you got? And
Yeah.
sometimes it would work.
Sometimes it would. And then like, there's that crazy one he had against Houston where he catches in the middle of the field and he's running 40 yards to the end zone, but obviously not a very consistent way to run your offense.
Yeah.
So what are the spots on this roster? We talked a little bit about offensive line. Um, Going past the draft here into like some post-draft free agent guys. I know you were talking a little bit maybe about adding guard potentially at some point here, if there's some way to kind of address that over the summer. What are some of the spots on this roster that you still think need to be touched up a little bit here and there?
I could see, adding another edge. I could see that. Because, Thule is like an inside outside hybrid type for me. Like he'll
Mm-hmm.
he'll play a little bit everywhere, but I feel like on 3rd down specifically, he's going to be next to Khalil, not opposite Khalil. Opposite Khalil would be either Kennard or Bud Dupree, which is fine. You can get by with that, but I would like to see if there's just something else out there. Like they're not going to get Jacob Martin, but that kind of flavor of rusher, right? The
Yeah,
bursty, bendy, like that kind of guy to put directly opposite of Khalil Mack and Thule, who I think are very, very deadly when next to each other. And so I don't really want to break that up, but you still need somebody on the other side, right? Or if it's like a dynamic DPR that lines up inside, like a dynamic like 3 technique. No idea where you're going to get that this late in the offseason. You probably have to make some calls and see if something is out there on the trade market. But I'd be willing to bet if they are able to get another pass rusher, which I do think they need, it probably wouldn't be until in season when you start seeing teams kind of go through fire sales.
yeah,
So like any actual substantive move they make is going to be like week 5, week 6. But
probably.
I would like to see another pass rusher. Linebacker's fine. More than fine, I would say. Corner, I like Tarheeb. I like Cam Hart. You could probably sniff around to see if there's another one.
Yeah,
But again, that's going to be 5, 6 weeks into the year. Like maybe, let's say let's say the Dolphins start off real bad. Like I would see what Jalen Ramsey's availability is.
You don't think Jalen Ramsey gets traded at some point in the offseason here, or has that ship kind of sailed with the draft?
I kind of feel like if it was going to happen, it would have already happened before the
Mm,
draft. I don't get the sense it's going to happen over summer. I mean, maybe it's possible. It's possible, like after June 1st, that's like a trigger date, or leading into training camp, maybe. But and if I was the Chargers, I would at least like put in a phone call, like, hey, if you're going to move them, give me a call first. We'll see what the
right.
offer is. I'm trying to think of any other corners that might be available that are starter worthy. And that there's not many, right? Because it's a hard position to find, but I think they could add there too.
Yeah, I definitely think they could add corner. I think, like you said, edge. Maybe you find like a piece there. I guess Zadarius Smith is like still available. Probably not exactly what they would go for, but like maybe he's kind of someone that fits into that mix. Um, and then, like we said, I think offensive line is probably maybe a spot they address if they bring in a guy, but maybe they're just confident with what they have going forward. Um, all right, let's talk really quickly about, uh, I guess, what did this draft say about the Chargers, and what do you kind of think the next step for the team is to take this year in regards to what they did in the draft?
I think honestly, what this says about the Chargers is they know that defense wins championships,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you have to have a good enough offense to get you in a
Yeah.
deep enough position for that defense to win you the championship in the first place, right? Like the defense can only do so much if your offense is getting like 50 yards total in the first half. So I think that they realized like this team was very unbalanced, and I get it. Like the roster was what the roster was. There was no way this was going to be a balanced team in year one of the regime. But I think the defense was so good last year, and the offense was so inconsistent that they really wanted to hammer it home this offseason of like bringing the team into balance. And are there still weak areas? Yes, but there's a lot less weak areas now than there were 3 months ago. And that's all you can really hope for because this was already a playoff team. So are they ready to go on like a true, actual, honest to God Super Bowl run against Buffalo, against Baltimore, against Kansas City, against, I don't know, insert AFC powerhouse here? I still think they might need one more year because, again, a
Yeah.
lot of this core is young, very young. But if you told me they make it to the division round and they come within like, a whisker of making it to the AFC championship, like just being right there to the point where you're going into 2026 of like, okay, now this is the year. Like, I think that's probably where this team ends up. Second round of the playoffs, giving everybody a game. Like, it's not going to look like last year's playoff. Like, I think they are going to give everybody a game and they're going to come really, really close. And that's going to be the stepping stone to the actual true Super Bowl window, which is 2026 and probably through 2028.
Yeah, I agree that they're not quite set up to make that final step this year, but you've built the roster enough to where now you're not that concerned that, there's much less heavy lifting to do compared to when Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz first got here. I think what this draft taught me is like, don't use one draft as a sample size for everything.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I think a lot of us, even myself and people in draft media certainly were a little guilty of like, here comes the offensive lineman in the first and second round. Here comes, no wide receivers until X, right? Like,
Well,
but
I'll tell you this much.
yeah,
If Gray Zabel was on the board at 22, they would have thought about it.
yeah, I think that's true. I think Gray Zabel would have been Gray Zabel would have been one they thought about. But again, like that's what we were saying, like or Tate Ratledge later on, right? It was just that these guys didn't quite fall to like the range where they were. So then it was like, okay. So, but those would have been like the two
Yeah.
prototypical Harbaugh fits, obviously. But it did teach me to, you know, don't be scared to think too much about, okay, this isn't the craziest pick in a mock draft. Or also, don't be afraid to double and triple up positions. I mean, we've seen them now triple up at wide receiver at 2 drafts in a row, including the Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson draft last year, right? Like, just kind of throwing darts out there, even though in a very prototypical fashion, we like to go, okay, you address this first round, you address this second round, you address this third round. And they really showed they were down to play BPA.
Well, and I think it speaks to the philosophy of like, don't half-ass addressing a position. If something is a weakness, you make it not a weakness. Because if you kind of half-ass it and you throw like one pick at it here, one pick at it there, like, okay, if that one guy that you took doesn't work out, you're still in the exact same spot you were. So you kind of increase your odds of actually fixing the problem if you really, really get aggressive and attack it, which they've done. And now the problem, in my opinion, is fixed. Like, you don't have to worry about receiver anymore. So you go into next year's offseason, like, not even really having that be a thought in your mind. Whereas if they just took one this year, like, let's say they only took Trey Harris, right? And you're going into 2026 with Trey Harris and Ladd McConkey. In the back of your mind, you're still thinking like, well, we need a 3,
Right.
And so it's like you'd end up spending a pick on it anyway. So I like the aggression, and I like the philosophy of like, hey, if we have an issue, let's just make it not an issue. If we have a strength, let's make it a superpower. Like, let's be aggressive here. And we can't address everything in one off season anyway, so let's not even try. Like, let's just fix the things that have to be fixed one after another. And if we get an opportunity to take a guard or a center next year, we'll do that next year. But like, let's full ass this thing, not half ass it.
Right. Or you can kind of, wind up in a Falcons situation where they trade the whole farm for those 2 edges, and you hold and pray it works out, right? Like
Yep.
that, I feel like is kind of another example of that, where it's like, okay, but if the draft value board doesn't break our way and then we have to wait for next year, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world with this team. But Brett will be back to making videos with the Chargers. I'm sure he'll be talking about how many newtons of force Khalil Mack hits people with. So we will get a lot of great content from him this year. But Brett, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I'm excited. I really am. This is, I think, the most complete, most talented Chargers team I've seen in a few years now, like probably at least 3 or 4. Like, they had some really good rosters. I would say like 20, the last time they went on a run with the Jaguars game that we don't speak of anymore, like, they had a legitimately talented roster. And this is the best one since then. And to be honest, I think it might be even better. I think it's even more complete. So, I think things are moving in the right direction. Coaching staff is great. Quarterback's great. GM is great. That's kind of the main things you need. So if I was a Chargers fan, I'd be really excited.
All right. Well, see you guys next time, and bolt up as always.